Known for its distinctive style through visual distortion, subjective emotions, as well as dark and symbolic themes, German Expressionism is considered to be one of the most influential art movements of the 20th century. In this comparative study, I will explore the German Expressionist film movement and analyze two films, Nosferatu, a 1922 silent horror film directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, and Black Swan, a 2010 psychological thriller directed by Darren Aronofsky. These two films are worthy of analysis because despite having different cultural contexts, both distort and stylize realities to enhance the emotional impact, which is a common characteristic of German Expressionism. Since these films were created almost 90 years apart, it can show the significant impact that this movement had on cinema and the lasting results still seen today. Nosferatu is an unofficial adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Set in 1938, the film follows the protagonist, Thomas Hatter, a realtor who travels to Transylvania to help Count Orlok buy property. It was released in the peak of the Expressionist art movement and was heavily impacted by the socio-economic state of Germany in the 1920s, where society was still suffering both physically and mentally as a result of World War I, especially the economic crisis that followed. This is specifically seen in the decline of the town's overall well-being after Count Orlok's arrival. Black Swan, on the other hand, follows Nina Sawyers, a prima ballerina in New York City chosen to star as the lead in Swan Lake. She finds herself struggling with an internal battle of good versus evil, resulting in a drastic decline in her mental state. Black Swan was released and takes place in 2010, a period of time where Hollywood was deeply impacted by the economic collapse that occurred 2 years prior, which can be seen by themes of anxiety and pressure in the film. In examining these films, I will specifically analyze the use of expressionist techniques in the films' mise-en-scène and editing, and how it portrays the psychological state of the characters, and how this can be used to build tension. There are two aspects of mise-en-scène that play important roles in both building tension as well as symbolizing characters' internal psychological states. This includes character design through costumes and makeup as well as set design. Additional to mise-en-scène is editing. More specifically, the use of contrast and exaggeration within all of these aspects. The idea of having costumes and makeup mirror internal states of different characters was a very common aspect of German Expressionist film, which no differently can be observed in these two works. One example of this is the costume worn by Max Schreck, who played Count Orlok in Nosferatu. The costume includes a black overcoat with exaggerated shoulders and long pants to hide his body, as a result making him look unnaturally taller and skinnier. The costume also includes zoomorphic elements to exaggerate different features of his face, including prosthetic ears, fake fingers and teeth, all of which are painted white to give him a very pale look. This exaggeration adds a grotesque and animal-like quality to his character, enforcing the idea that he is a supernatural being, heightening the sense of dread, which in turn adds on to the building of tension. Count Orlok's character is a symbol for death. As he moves to the town of Wisborg, tragedy follows him, representing the tragedies following the First World War and the repercussions that Germany had to face as a result of it. This idea is reinforced in the costume of Hatter. The costumes directly mirror his emotional state as he enters an internal turmoil after delving deeper into the supernatural. Throughout the films, his costumes consist of formal clothing, including dress pants and jacket. After discovering secrets in the castle, his clothing becomes increasingly more disheveled, reflecting his descent into fear and chaos. In the beginning of the film, he's shown wearing light-colored clothing, symbolic of his naivety and overall lack of awareness. Throughout the film, his clothing becomes continuously darker until he shifts to dark clothing. This, for example, is seen in the end. This transformation builds tension as we, the viewer, directly observe the shift from being unaware into a state of peril when his wife dies. The dark clothing therefore also symbolizes his grief and state of depression, a feeling of which can characterize German society in the 1920s. The crafting of characters as inhumane and evil, like Count Orlok, can also be seen in the costumes and makeup worn by Natalie Portman, who plays Nina Sawyers. In the scene where Nina discovers her black swan, or her new sense of power, her eyes turn red and feathers start forming at the surface of her skin. The use of exaggeration in the scene is to add a sense of intensity. This moment portrays Nina's internal struggle in a disturbing and unnatural way, which contributes to the growth of tension in the film. The choice to make her eyes turn red is similar to the elongated teeth of Count Orlok, which was used to associate them with symbols associated with horror. The red eyes specifically signify demonic possession or a predatory creature, which adds on to the emotional impact of fear and creates a visceral response by the audience, building tension. The feathers that grow out of the back of Nina, both in this scene and towards the end, give her animalistic qualities, which could represent the violent and predatory intentions as she's being possessed by her black swan, or her second evil personality. There is also a similar concept in Nina's costume, similar to the development of Hatter's costume. As Nina becomes more powerful, the costume of the Black Swan becomes increasingly more realistic. In the beginning of the film, it starts with bumps on her skin, whereas towards the end of the film, she transforms into a realistic swan. This implies that the more realistic her costume becomes, the darker and villainous her mindset is. Another common characteristic of German Expressionism is in the set design, which is conveying a relationship between a character and the setting they are placed in. Characters often seem to merge with the setting, allowing their surroundings to further express the characters in deeper ways. Many times throughout Black Swan, when there's a shot of Nina alone, the background behind her is often split into two halves, a black half and a white one. This is a visual metaphor that acts as a sense of foreshadowing, representing the dichotomy between good and evil aspects of her identity and personality. This creates a feeling of claustrophobia that Nina feels, and in this case, the set design becomes a direct extension of her emotional state, as she struggles to meet the demands of her role in the ballet. This reflects the overarching ballet culture during the 2000s and 2010s. The 2008 economic collapse caused a drastic change in employment opportunities, and therefore, ballerinas would be subjected to harsh conditions to maintain their careers. Nina's obsession with perfection shows the poor conditions she subjects herself to. For example, working overtime resulting in injury in order to meet the demands of her mother and production director. While Black Swan's set design directly reflects Nina's internal state, the set design for Nosferatu instead is used to reflect the distance between Count Orlok and Hatter. Within the walls of this castle, Count Orlok always appears to fit into the background. For example, in a shot where he is standing in an arched doorway, his height fits exactly that of the door, in a similar fashion to him sleeping in a coffin. This demonstrates to the viewer that he truly belongs in his castle, increasing the eerie atmosphere and sense of dread that the viewer feels for Hatter, creating a minor dramatic irony, building tension. The fact that Count Orlok fits perfectly into the doorframe also exaggerates his height, adding on to his character design. It also further distances Hatter and Count Orlok by juxtaposing Hatter from the environment. In addition to mise-en-scene, editing plays a very important role in both films. Aronofsky effectively uses a variety of different editing techniques in order to express the psychological state of Nina. For example, in a scene where Nina and Lily go clubbing, Aronofsky uses extremely rapid jump cuts infused with frequent cuts to black in order to create a sense of confusion, exactly how Nina feels after taking the drugs, and she starts to hallucinate. The audience feels just as disoriented and overwhelmed as Nina does. This lack of clarity builds tension, as the viewer is unable to form a sense of time or space, or form an expectation for what is to come. The scene shows the viewer that Nina has begun to lose control over herself, and that she's starting to transform into the Black Swan. This abruptly cuts to a more controlled shot. This shows that although she's starting to lose discipline of herself, she's not crossed the threshold of losing herself completely. It implies that while she's starting to lose her mind, there's still a level of consciousness present. The editing in Nosferatu is used in a completely different way. Instead, Murnau uses the editing to continue to characterize Count Orlok as a villainous creature. One example of this is the use of fast forward. When Count Orlok takes Hatter to his castle in the first part of the film, the carriage moves unnaturally fast. And again, when he is piling coffins in the courtyard, he is moving at a speed that is unnatural, adding on to the character design as the villain. This also reflects Hatter's internal mental state by creating a dramatic irony. Having the audience see the unnatural character of Count Orlok shows how he lacks awareness and how naive he really is. Lastly, cross-cutting is used to alternate perspectives between Count Orlok towering over Hatter and Hatter's wife Helen having a disturbing episode. As Count Orlok towers over Hatter, it increases the sense of vulnerability and powerlessness associated with him, as Count Orlok is a force he cannot control. The cross-cutting to Helen mirrors this powerlessness, as when Count Orlok possesses her, it implies that he's taking over her in order to increase Hatter's internal anxiety and fear of losing his wife. To conclude, despite both films having different contexts, both use German Expressionist techniques in their mise-en-scene and editing to create tension. Murnau uses these techniques exclusively when portraying Count Orlok to emphasize the sinister nature of his character. Therefore, these techniques contrast the rest of the film, building a sense of dread and fear within the viewer. Aronofsky, on the other hand, uses these techniques to emphasize Nina's degrading mental state by amplifying and applying it to the surrounding setting. Both of these demonstrate the effect of German Expressionism on tension and the lasting impact it continues to have as film and cinema continue to evolve, highlighting the significance of the film movement.